Hi, welcome back to the Becoming Stacy podcast. I'm your host, Stacy Feeling, and today I want to preface this with a very heavy and maybe triggering topic for some of you who may be listening, and that is around domestic violence. We are going to talk about my own personal experience just a little bit, as well as the new movie that has come out and the book that I recently read called It Ends With Us. And I know that this is something that is becoming more popular. It is being talked about more. There's more awareness around this, but I know it is a very heavy and disturbing conversation to have, but I also feel like it's an important one. So just to give you a heads up, if you don't know much about me or you haven't listened to my previous podcast, She Wakes Up, I do have a experience in a toxic relationship for 10 years with my daughter's dad when I was 19 years old up until the time she turned 8. So I would have been 26, 27. And I will link the episode to my older podcast. So if you want to hear more of a backstory, because I'm not going to go into all the details today on this episode, but if you want to know more about my story, I will link that so that you can go take a listen to that. But just to give you a little bit of a backstory, like I said, we were young. It didn't really escalate to a point where I started to want out until my daughter was about 3. I stayed until she was 8, and it never was physical as far as him putting his hands on me. He would throw things at me. He would get really close in my face and yell and spit on me. Um, there's a lot of red flags, and I am going to talk about the red flags because I feel like it's important because they're not all the obvious flags that we would think when we think about domestic violence. And when we talk about domestic abuse, it's not just violence. It is the verbal, emotional abuse that comes along with that. And sometimes you get that without the violent aspect. And it looks different for everybody's situation. But the book that I just finished, I read it in like 4 days. It Ends With Us. I couldn't tell you how closely related that story was to my own story. And it makes me sad because I believe that that is the case for a lot of other women out there. And the only difference from my story to the story in the book, and I haven't seen the movie yet, I do have plans to see that, but I didn't grow up in a household that had abuse. My parents are still married. My dad very much loves and respects my mom. And so there was never, there was the bickering and things like that that most people have, but never an escalated argument, never calling out my mom's name, never any sort of abuse. And, nothing that ever made me feel uncomfortable or that, kind of what you got depicted if you did read the book. Oh, and also I should throw out there, this might be a spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't read the book. And so I didn't have that experience, but everything else was very similar to me. And so the ending, I wept because that was so true. My daughter was my reason, my inspiration, my motivation, and the why as to why I got out of that relationship. And then the epilogue, which talks about, the writer's own experience with her mom and, the things that she had to see her mom go through, and that the book was dedicated to her mom and her mom's story. And understanding, and this is such a key takeaway from all of this, is we don't understand the tie that victims have to their abusers. And in the book, it is love. It is that this person cares so much about this other person because, from the perspective of Lily Bloom and her abuser, they had amazing moments together. They loved each other. When it was good, it was phenomenal. And when it was bad, it was bad. And so weighing out those things and trying to make sense of it and trying to rationalize, like, it's okay that, this happened 3 times in the last year. Look at all the other times that were great. And just justifying the reasons why we stay. And when we have kids, that is a huge part of why we end up staying. And this is me speaking from experience. I know everybody's situation is different, but so when I'm talking, please know that this is just my own situation and perspective of what the situation was for me. But that I stayed because my values are family and home. And like I just told you, my parents are still married. And like I wanted nothing more than to have a wholesome household and a loving family together and having that unit of mom, dad, and child. And no matter how hard I tried, it was never going to be healthy in the way that I viewed what a healthy relationship was. And so while I stuck it out because that is what I valued the most, and I did care about the person that I was with, and we did have a lot of good times together. And so I just thought that, we're young and we're going through some struggles. I was going through school and he was working all week long to try to provide, and it was still barely, doing it for us. And just a lot of stress for how young we were. And so I just thought, okay, if we get over this hump, if I get over, if I graduate school and I get a good job, then things will get better. He won't be so stressed out and it'll all be better, right? He's going to mature. He's going to realize that these aren't okay things and we're going to grow together. And just having those conversations with myself about like, it's going to be okay. He's going to change, trying to make it so that it was okay for me to stay in my mind, that the reasons why I stayed were bigger, better reasons than why I wanted to leave. And I still remember feeling like in those moments when I did want to leave, how sad I was, how stuck I felt, because I knew in my core that this wasn't what I deserved. This wasn't what my daughter needed to see. This wasn't what a normal, loving, healthy relationship looked like that I was trying to maintain. So I was trying to build this relationship and this family structure on a foundation that was crumbling. And I didn't know what was next. I didn't know how I was going to get out. Like I said, I was still in nursing school. I was only working part-time, and I knew I couldn't financially support myself. And so I made it work. And I just kept telling myself the reasons why it was going to get better. And then it got worse. And finally, and looking back, it's always so much easier to say, well, I could have done this or I should have done that. But when you're in it, it doesn't work like that. And mentally, the things that abuse can do to a person breaks you down. You don't become yourself. You end up going into survival mode. And that is a whole different person than the person that you are when you come out of that, if you're lucky to come up out of that. And so you can't sit there if you've never been in it. And if you're reflecting on a situation that you were in, but you were able to get out of, you cannot put yourself in the position of what you would do if you were actually in it. Because until you are, and I hope that none of you have to, or none of you are continuing to be in that. But if you are, please hear me when I say I understand and I don't judge you. But there is no way to understand unless you've been in the situation, to have a perspective to say, oh, well, you could just do this, or you should do this. We know. The victim knows. The victim doesn't know what to do with all of that. The victim has so many things floating around, and she or he, whoever is the victim, is surviving. And that's what I was doing. It was like, just keep swimming. Like the book talked about, literally every single day was just, let's go through the motions. Let's get what I have to do done. Let's check the boxes. And eventually I'll be done with school and we'll see, a turn in the corner of this life. It just kept getting worse. And I finally had my breaking point. And that's where my previous podcast came from. She Wakes Up was, I can't explain it to anybody. And anybody that has gone through this understands what I mean by you just had a moment where something happened and you said, this is it. No more. No more. Like the book where she, knew the moment that she saw him holding that baby, that was it. This has to end right now. And I packed up my car. I told my parents that I was coming to stay with them for a while until I got on my feet. And they didn't ask a lot of questions. I don't even know if they asked one, honestly. I got out and I stayed there and I never went back. And I knew that there were going to be other pieces to the puzzle that we're going to have to play out afterwards, figuring out parenting time and all the details and the things that you overthink when you're in the situation of how am I going to make this happen? How am I going to pay my bills? Where am I going to live? How am I going to? and it's just keep swimming. You're still in survival mode for a really long time after you get out, because you have to recalibrate. You're so used to living in this situation with this person that you forget how to be yourself and live as yourself and thrive as yourself and what those steps are. And so, yes, there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions. There's going to be a lot of unknowns, a lot of scary, discomforting things that you have to climb over. But if you allow yourself to be consumed by those things, you're going to be debilitated and you're going to be frozen and not be able to take any steps forward. And so I left. And in that moment, I was like, I don't even care. I just packed up the most important things, the things that I knew I needed, the sentimental things of my daughters, and we got out. And all I could think about was, I wish I would have done this years ago. Because my daughter, being 8 years old, had enough of her own experience to see, so now she, and coincidentally, her name is Lily also. Lily was the person that witnessed her parents in an abusive relationship. And so for her, the cycle continued, right? And she ended up in having to work through those patterns that she thought were a normal, healthy relationship. Even though she knew logically it wasn't, that was her comfort zone. That's what she knew. And also having a father that soon was uninvolved after we left, then had to struggle with that aspect and trying to find attributes of a father. It just so many things that, yes, if I would have left sooner, we wouldn't have had to go down such a hard path. She wouldn't have had to witness all of that for so many years. She wouldn't have had to question what a normal, healthy, loving relationship looked like. She wouldn't have had to worry for her mom. She wouldn't have to wonder what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like when she starts dating. All of these things, all of these patterns. And so it ends with us. I wrote her, I bought the book because her 18th birthday is on the 19th of this month. And so I actually bought the book for her with no intention on reading it yet. But I read it because I knew we had to see the movie together because it was so relevant to us. Like, that is our story. And so I read it and I wrote in it a note that she was my muse. She was my reason why I was able to endure and push through and come out and be stronger and teach her resilience and teach her strength. And I can't apologize enough, but I also know that I can't continue to blame any of that on me, because I really thought in the moment I was doing what was best, because family was at the core. That was my priority. And so I wrote a memo in there that it ends with us. And we're going to see the movie together. She has yet to read the book because I just gave it to her last night and told her that, read this so we can go see the movie together. And while it is the shittiest thing that we've ever had to go through together, she was there with me. And being a younger mom, we kind of grew up together in a little way and had gone through a lot of those things, the new things, the becoming, an adult, buying a house, getting a real job, all those things I was doing alongside of her, watching me. She was watching me this whole time. And that's what hurt, is that she watched me stay, but she also watched me fight. She watched me come up out of that. She watched me leave. She watched the struggles after I left, and yet continued to put those puzzle pieces back together for this new version of who we are, and not allowing our story to define us, to put a ceiling on where we are supposed to go, who we were supposed to love, where we were supposed to be. That we are that story of the example and of what is possible, and hopefully motivation, inspiration for other people who are going through that, to know that we know how difficult it can be. We know the struggles of what happens in that situation. And we also know what's on the other side. And it's not easy. There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of ties, there are a lot of pieces that are broken. If you just continue to move forward and keep swimming, you just got to keep swimming. So that is my tie into the book and the movie that I haven't watched yet, but I will. And if any of you read the book or watched the movie, I would love to hear your take, your perspective, any just takeaways at all. But I wanted to have this episode also be helpful in the fact that, why don't we bring awareness to this shit that isn't talked about enough? That, because when you're in it, you don't talk about it. And that was one of the things I was so afraid of getting out, was all the questions that I was going to be asked and all the judgment that was going to be put on me about, like, well, why did you stay for so long? Or how would you ever, why would that be okay? Why would you ever let anybody treat you that way? Because you don't think about it. Survival. So, red flags. And like the book had said, if you can pick up on these things and get out sooner than later, that's what you need to do. And I know I just said what I said about you can't tell somebody to get out. If you are in it early enough and you see these red flags before it becomes, like Lily did in the book, she knew, she saw the red flags, but she kept pushing on and she kept justifying it and saying, it's okay, it's okay. This isn't on you, this isn't your fault. And it'll start to get worse. The blaming will start to get worse. The belittling will start to get worse. The name calling. They often will blame you, or they will take credit for your good things, but will blame you for their bad things. They will blame you for the reason why you fell. They will blame you for the reason why your cell phone is broken. Even though you knew, you watched it happen. But this is part of the manipulation that happens in an abusive relationship. It's control and manipulation. And they turn it on you so that they don't have to process their own wrongdoing. And some of it is literally a psychological disorder that they cannot, that is not their reality. So in their head, this is what they truly believe. And they're spinning it to make you believe it as well, because they're not the bad guy. It's your fault. And I remember somebody telling me, who was in an abusive relationship, that they would cry for help and say, if this was to a close family member too, they would say, he hit me again. And her response was to this victim, well, what did you say to make him hit you? And that is where the blame comes from. Well, if you wouldn't have said that, if you wouldn't have opened your mouth, if you wouldn't have burnt dinner, if you wouldn't have parked in my parking space, if you wouldn't have gone out with your friend, if you wouldn't have answered that phone call. No, I don't care what you do. That is never an excuse to hurt another person, to call somebody out of their name. And this is just human being common sense on how to treat a person, but you don't get to do that. And there's some buzzwords that float around all the time: narcissist and gaslighting. And I bet you that anybody that's been in a relationship understands those two things very, very well. But I also don't want to overuse these terms, because I want there to be accuracy in these things, because they're very severe. These are very big things to call a person or say a person is doing to you. So if you don't know the meaning of a word, please don't use it, especially something like this, because it is serious, because people that have experienced these things know truly what those things are. And so for these to be thrown around as like lay words like everybody that you date is a narcissist, I doubt it. And so please understand the words that you're using. And so I just wanted to define those, that a narcissist is actually a complex personality disorder and mental health condition. So it is actually a diagnosis of a personality disorder. So it is not just a description of a personality trait. It is a personality disorder where the person has an excessive interest in themselves and a lack of empathy for other people or the things that they are doing. And that's where the blame is like, "Oh, I don't care that I just hurt you. Wouldn't have hurt you if you wouldn't have burned dinner or whatever." Just no empathy for the actions that they are doing. So it's different than just being selfish. It's like selfish times 10 and having that grandiose idea of self and also lack of empathy for other people. And then gaslighting is a manipulation and control where someone is deliberately feeding information to make the victim question a memory, a perception, or their own sanity. So oftentimes when you hear of people talking about how they were in an abusive relationship and they feel like they're crazy, like, am I crazy for thinking this? Am I crazy that this is the reaction that I got from this situation? And I remember being in a situation where I caught him doing something and I saw it with my own eyes. And he didn't see me see him, right? So for on his side, there was no proof that I saw him. But I'm not blind. I know exactly what I saw. There was no way that I could have confused what I saw. I saw what I saw. But yet he almost convinced me that I didn't see what I saw. He made me feel so crazy. And he made me like, and not, I don't want to say that lightly, but just like made me mad in my thoughts of like, did I really? No way. Like, I know what I saw, and trying to convince not only him, but myself of what I saw and just how that makes you feel to be questioned when you know the truth. And that's just it. In these situations, as they build upon, time after time after time, it becomes a lot easier for that manipulation to happen where you do start to believe and you do have, they do a really good job of coercion where they could talk the victim into doing things that they normally wouldn't do from that manipulation, not calling the cops, dropping charges that may have been pressed. And this can also come from some of those threatening behaviors too, where threats are often thrown out there, especially if you are saying that you're going to leave or that if this behavior doesn't stop, that you guys are breaking up, that there will be threats of, well, I'm just going to kill myself, or I'm going to make sure that you don't have any money if you leave, or I'm going to make sure that you never get to see our kids. And just threats like that scare the victim into taking action, because those are the things that are like worst case scenario things. To tell a mom that you are going to make sure that and do everything in your power that your kids never get to see you again. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to rethink what I'm going to do. And I'm probably not going to take action to leave right now because I need to think about this more and I need to have a better plan. I might need to talk to a lawyer to make sure that he can't take these kids away from me, right? Like all the things that you don't think about that are happening from the victim's perspective and the things that are being said and done to her or him. Again, I don't want to generalize, but statistically speaking. And then you get this, once it all settles, once it calms down, you get the apology, the pleading, please don't leave. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Like the book, he was apologetic. And then that's when they remember, oh my gosh, I do love this person. And this person does love me. And I remember all the good things that this person and I have together. And it's okay. Maybe he finally realizes it this time, right? But then the behavior continues. There is no evolution of things not continuing to happen. You're not getting any sort of relief. You're still getting called out of your name. You're still getting screamed at. Walls are still having holes in them. He still has road rage, threats, doesn't let you spend any of your money, all of these things. And then jealousy. Jealousy is another factor too, where it could just be jealousy of a family relationship or a relationship you have with a friend. In that, again, if this person is very highly thinking of themselves, if you were to hold somebody higher than that person, potentially, right? Like if they were ever threatened by your relationship with your mom, but that can't be greater than the relationship you have with them. So they might try to manipulate it to where you don't see your mom as much or you don't talk to your mom because they cannot have another person be more important or equally important to you as they are. And so those red flags, I'll just kind of highlight them for you, is the belittlement and the calling of names, blaming or making you take credit for their bad actions and decisions, the gaslighting, which again is the deliberate feeding of information to make the victim question their memories, perceptions, or their own sanity, controlling of money in relationships, constant apologies and repeating behavior without remorse. They may have a woe is me kind of approach to things and an outlook on why these things happen to them, or of course this would happen to me, or of course you don't love me, and that kind of a attitude. A lot of anger and aggression and threats. So this can again not necessarily be violence at the victim, but it can be throwing of objects nearby as, a way to purposely intimidate the person. Anything that gives anybody that fear, punching holes in walls and doors, breaking things, breaking personal objects, cell phones, laptops, furniture. I've had a chair flipped over on me. We were sitting down to dinner and the dinner plate got thrown across the room that I had just spent all day cleaning. And road rage, I know we all get a little bit like sometimes, but this is just extreme road rage, getting out of the car, threatening to fight people, fighting. Anytime that you go anywhere and this person gets riled up, they're like ready to fight a person. And then that jealousy of, not wanting or questioning, always being, wondering and where you're going, who you're going with, what you're doing, and that lack of empathy when they do those things. And then some things that you can do if you're in this situation or fresh out of this situation, because like I talked about, and because of how, the book describes the character's mom and how she felt and how she loved this man so much that she stayed with him. But at the end of the day, she was a shell of a person. And that is what abuse makes you feel like when you are a victim, is you feel like a shell of a person because you are in fight or flight all the time. And you are constantly walking on eggshells to try to make it as best as you can. You don't want to provoke the person. And so you become somebody that you're not. And getting to know who you are again is super important. And that is just taking those steps of, one, remembering that there was a life before this, there was a you before this, trying to maybe have conversations or journal out to that version of you, forgiveness of not just for that person, but forgiveness for yourself and letting go. Like the end of the book where, you can't continue to hold on, even though you want to, even though there is an attachment, you love that person. Maybe you have kids with that person. You have a whole life. I had 10 years with this person. That was the 10 years, in my 20s. That was my whole 20s. And just letting go and not having that be your forever story, that is a part of your story. It doesn't have to be who you are forever. And not allowing that person to have that hold on you anymore once you do separate those ties. That setting those boundaries is super important, and communicating those boundaries and talking about your emotions and what's going on with other people that you trust, because I left my support system in the dark when I was going through this, because again, I was afraid of the judgment. I was afraid that they were going to make me leave, right? And I wasn't really ready to leave because I had so many things that I was trying to figure out on my own. And so I was just afraid. I didn't want other people's opinions, already feeding my head that's full of stuff already that I'm trying to sort through. And so I encourage you, though, that the people that love you, that you can trust, just care about you. And they might not understand. They may never understand, but it's not their job to understand. It's their job to listen and to be there and to support you and try to connect you with resources that might be available to you as a way to kind of plan your out. Or if you are out, things that you can do to get connected, to find yourself again, to find a community, to find people outside of that circle. Because when you're with somebody, a lot of times, especially if they're very controlling, you don't have a whole lot of people that support you in your social circle because you don't have a social circle. Being in an abusive relationship is very isolating, and it can feel really lonely when you get out, because again, you are alone with yourself, and yourself, this version of you that you see in the mirror, is a stranger. And so taking time to heal, knowing that you aren't broken, right? There's nothing wrong with you. Sure, maybe you weren't in the right all the time, but you are no longer being told that you're stupid, that you suck, that you can't do this, you can't do that, it's your fault. If you wouldn't have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. You're not in that anymore. And truth be told, you were never meant to be in that. And so giving yourself permission to not be okay is okay. And just take it one day at a time, remembering the reason why you got out. Just like at the end of the story, just like for my story, my reason why I got out was so much more than any of the reasons combined as to why I stayed. And I see that now because I'm out. It's really hard to see that when you're in it. And I know that. But there is hope, there is support, there are resources. The community that I live in has so many resources for women in these situations. And the statistics are sad in that about 85% of victims of abuse go back to their abuser at some point. So that just goes to tell you how strong this is, how real it is, and that it comes from a good place, or it comes from a survival place, and sometimes both. Sometimes it comes from fear. We're afraid that if we don't go back, that the threats that were made to us, we don't want to lose our life. We don't want our kids to not be able to see us again. All those things. So it is my passion, and I don't have an answer. This is just a conversation. And thank you for being here with me and sitting and having this hard discussion. But my passion is getting the victims to stop looking at themselves as the reason why these things are happening, and to stop pointing the finger at the victim and making it her fault that she's staying, making it her fault that she didn't get out, making it her fault that she continues to put herself in these positions. And that was one of the biggest things from this book, that we need to start putting the abuser under the microscope. It's not what is wrong with these women or these victims that are in these situations. What is wrong with the person that is putting this person through these things? Families, not just individuals. This is serious. This has effects. Like this book, this is a cycle. We need to break the cycle. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is continuing to have conversations and normalizing the breaking of the cycle. and doing something with these abusers, because a lot of them never have consequences. And a lot of them, if they are true narcissists who only see themselves and have lack of remorse and empathy, they're never going to care about half of the things that the victim is worried about. They don't stress about not seeing their kids. And I'm not speaking from somebody that knows this, but I can only assume because I have been with somebody. It seems as if, I'm going to put it that way, that these abusers don't give a fuck that the person that they were abusing and their children have to go on and live with this and sometimes relive it and rebuild themselves and find the belief that they are good enough and start over from building this person that they don't even know anymore. The abuser doesn't care that all of the things that they have done has been debilitating and a lifelong, constant healing process that has to unfold because of the abuse. Those words will never leave that victim's mind. The things that they second guessed that they shoulda, coulda, woulda done will never leave their mind. And that's why when I say that my healing journey never ends, is because it really truly doesn't. I am on this path to continue to find myself, to continue to better myself, to continue to make a difference, to empower other people. And like I just told you, I don't have all the answers, but I know I don't want this to continue. I want to break the cycle, and things need to be done. Change needs to be to happen. And every single one of us that can come together and have this conversation is a part of that. And so thank you. And like I said, if you have anything to share about today's episode, or you want to continue to have a conversation, please message me at Stacy Failing on Instagram. You can also email me, stacyfailing@gmail. I'll put those in the show notes for you, along with the other episode if you want to hear more of my story. But I'm here, and I'm going to end it with, it ends with us.